This is Prince George's County Executive Rashawn Baker, and you're listening to the Maryland Crabs Podcast.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Fernay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Fernay.
Hey, welcome to the Maryland Crabs. This is John Fernay and Tim Hamilton. Across the table from us today, we have a guest this time, and we're not in the kitchen. We're in my spare room with the smelly college student stuff in the corner. And we have Annapolis Alderman Jared Littmann.
It looks like a homeless camp in here. It does.
That's my secret. I'm doing my part.
Good morning.
But yeah, before we get into it, we want to talk a little bit about the city of Annapolis, the election. What was in it for Alderman Littmann? He's looking forward to now that he's not running again. I would say he's quitting on us, but the guy's put a lot of...
he's got senioritis.
Yeah, that's true. Make sure you go back and check out the forum that we had, which was last week's episode.
That was fun.
And we did a forum at the Ram's Head on stage with all four mayoral candidates, and we're going to probably touch on that a little bit with Alderman Littmann in just a few minutes.
He did his homework, and he listened to it.
Oh, you know what?
And he gave us homework. He's the first guest ever who gave us homework.
He sent an email last night about like 11 o'clock saying, I've got a few notes for tomorrow. And it had 9 attachments. I'm like, okay, I'm in bed.
The Catholic boy in me is like, all right, I better start reading. I actually did.
All right, so it was 5 p.m., but that's okay.
I didn't get it till 11, so it was...
No, there was that one that was like 10. He texted me, he goes, it's 11. I said, don't whine, it's 10:55. And it was the raw data one.
To be clear, it wasn't me that was whining, it was John.
Yeah, yeah. John is the whiner. I point that out every episode. So in full disclosure, we're pretty tight with Jared. We're all friends, and whenever some local gossip comes around, and he also calls us out for being, rightfully so, conspiracy theorists, he just nodded. And so whenever something happens in town, and we'll all text back and forth, in all fairness, he will agree with us only probably half the time. The other time, he scolds us like he's our dad.
We're full of it.
Well, yeah.
Well, often. Call it what it is, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
There's a couple podcasts where he said that he wanted to call us out on a few things. So if we have time in the end, there will be some calling out going on.
I would love for your podcast to be live so we could live tweet and say, this is what you're wrong on.
This is why we don't do it. So that's why I'm married. That's why I get corrected in live time.
That's too much technical.
Mm-hmm. So you've been alderman for going on 4 years now in Ward 5. So if people don't know Ward 5. Oh, yeah, 5, because you were appointed in the Cohen administration to replace Matt Silverman, who was the Ward 5. So Ward 5 is Forest Drive that goes down from Chinkapin.
Spa Road, right, down Forest Drive on the right, down to Robinwood, and then it goes down Hilltop, both sides, down to probably like Milkshake.
So the way I describe it, on the west side of Forest Drive, it includes Hunt Meadow and Annapolis Overlook, skipping over Robinwood, which is Ward 6. On the east side of Forest Drive...
Why was Robinwood skipped over? Would that be like gerrymandering?
It was part of the districting to keep like neighborhoods together.
Okay.
And on the east side, it goes from Spa Road down to about President Street and Hilltop Lane on the east boundary.
Okay, so you've got Milkshake Lane and where that development is, so it goes all the way down to President, and that butts up into Wards 6 and 7, I think, right there.
All the wards almost meet in that area.
In that little corner.
Yeah.
I think yours is the most diverse ward, probably, in...
It is certainly diverse. It's one of the few wards, I think one of only 2, along with Ward 3, that actually has more Hispanic than African-Americans. Obviously, still majority white, but significant Hispanic and significant African-American. I believe it's the only ward, or maybe only one of 2, that does not have any public housing.
That does not
have any public housing.
Because Robinwood's carved out for the most part.
But yeah, I know that. I know it's funny. And like on Forest Drive, where Tyler crosses Forest Drive, you straddle it, and you can have 1 foot in Ward 5, 1 foot in Ward 7, and Ward 6 just runs right between your legs. It's just like...
Actually, Ward 5 is almost 2 separate islands. It does not connect because you have the middle school, which is county property, and Robinwood, actually, the 2 almost triangles don't actually meet.
Oh, so the school property is exempt from the ward lines because I guess
it's carved out. It's one of the few. So other schools are in city limits, and some schools are in city limits, some are not. But Annapolis Middle is not in school.
So you don't have a contiguous ward.
correct. I find that odd.
I heard Hunt Meadow wants to secede. Is that true?
I have not heard that rumor.
I got to talk to Michael Peruka. He's all about that secession. We'll figure out.
Has anyone ever seceded? Has any area ever seceded from the city? I know that they're always annexed, but has anyone ever left?
Eastport threatened it about 17 years ago.
Oh, my kids threaten to run away all the time, too. It's not going to happen. But I don't think anyone's ever done that, right?
I do. I'd have to look. I do kind of remember hearing something that somebody wanted to go into the county, and it had something to do with the water access.
I have never heard of any piece of land leaving the city to go to the county. There was discussion about what would happen with a few annexed properties like the Catherine properties, because they allegedly...
That's the polite firm for Crystal Spring, right?
Yes, it is. That they had not met all the terms of the annexation agreements, and now it's been over 10 years. And so now the legal question came up, well, what happens? If they didn't meet their agreement, what does...
And that was like sewer hookups and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that was water and sewer.
So they had a certain amount of time where they had to hook up to the city water, the developer did.
They're supposed to do it within 1 year, and they could ask for 1 year extensions, and they did not. They could ask for the 1 year extensions for up to 10 years. It's been past 10 years. And actually, skipping around a bit, the Class 1 rating that we've heard about for the fire department, I asked Chief Stokes about how did we get Class 1? Because my understanding was when we had that legislation about the annexations not being completed, was that we didn't get Class 1 because of those isolated properties not ever hooking up to city water. And actually the answer is they were kind of carved out. So those properties are still not Class 1, but the rest of the city was able to be Class 1.
And his, just out of curiosity, his excuse or explanation on that to the rating company would be because they've been undeveloped and they're still sort of like in this limbo purgatory type thing.
I could not tell you what the rating agency evaluation of that was. Another interesting tidbit on that Class 1 rating, we've been hearing how it's going to lead to lower insurance rates. Well, as timing would have it, my store's insurance rate came up, and so I asked, "Oh, great! I get lower rating now." He said,
"And what store would that be?"
K&B True Value.
K&B True Value.
Shameless plug, right?
Located right on Hillsmere and Forest Drive.
It's the only hardware store left in town without Depot in the title.
Well, our Depot is actually not in town.
Then you're golden.
I will say, unabashedly, it's been a godsend for any number of reasons.
I asked my insurance agent about the lower rate, and he said, "No, actually, you're already in the what's called protected class." And so there's either protected or unprotected. The insurance agencies don't care about Class 1 and 2.
And what does protected class mean as far as distance from hydrants?
It means we were already in the best rated class from the insurance company's perspective. They didn't care whether it was 1 or 2. And it's obviously just anecdotal, one particular instance, but I was all excited to get my insurance cost reduced.
So that's not that. It's something that there's some people in outer lying areas that we say, because I know down in the Annapolis Neck was always a big problem, and that was why the Station 8 was built by the county, because if something burned down on the neck down Arundel on the Bay, then that was got a foundation with a chart house on top.
Well, that's what we had. I live in Arundel on the Bay, and every house fire that we had was just a total loss, every single one. Mm-hmm. And so Station 8's been phenomenal. It took for us forever to get that, because I think that was a battle between a county councilwoman, I think it was Janet Owens and Barbara Samarizak at the time that they were bound. I think that was a battle between the two of them.
Right.
And I think Barbara finally won, and we got the Station 8. It's been great. So let's go back a little bit here. So you're an attorney, which is why you're meticulous with all the emails you send with the homework that we have to do. But so you're a Jersey boy originally, right?
I am. I grew up in northern Jersey, outside about half an hour west of New York City.
All right. And you went to school out in Missouri?
I did. I found a school that had a program that really appealed to me. At the time, environmental engineering was a new concept. So I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and they had a program called Engineering and Public Policy. A few years after I left, they renamed it to be Environmental Engineering. People could better picture what that means than engineering and public policy, so that's why I just shorthand it to environmental engineering.
It also makes the business cards a lot more efficient.
It does.
At that point.
I also had a couple minors, political science and environmental science.
So you said to me the other day, we were talking about, I forget how we got into it, but we were talking about the people who run for office, and we were talking about Bill Clinton, and I said that I didn't believe Bill Clinton actually inhaled, because he's just one of those guys that you knew was going to run for office. So he's a guy that wanted to fit in, and you kind of laughed, said, all my friends said that they always knew I was going to run.
Yeah, I always had an interest. Even when I was in college, I worked for a law firm between, I think in my senior year, if I'm remembering correctly. It was just sort of a great introduction, and that law firm was very involved in local politics. So I worked on a few campaigns at that time, and I grew up in a household where doing things for the public, being involved, was a high priority, and my parents were great role models in that sense, and so I developed that interest. I had an interest in environmental issues at a young age. And so that was my hope, that I'd go to college, I'd go to law school, I'd work on environmental policy issues and help clean up the world.
Which is what happened.
Yes. So after college, I don't know about help clean up the world, but I did pursue it.
Oh, Montgomery County.
So after college, I went to law school at University of Maryland. That's what brought me to Maryland. So I've been a Marylander now since 1994. University of Maryland had a terrific program in environmental law issues. So when you get your law degree, it's just a law degree. It's not environmental law, but that was concentration of mine. And I had really enjoyed it. I had a great education. And I was able to get a clerkship with Judge Ann Harrington in Rockville. So that's what brought me to Montgomery County. And she was just a fantastic person to work for. From there, I worked for a law firm for a year and a half. Then I got a terrific job in the county attorney's office for Montgomery County. I started as an assistant county attorney, then associate county attorney. And then after 4 years, I was at a stage in my life where I had previously gotten what I still think is excellent advice as a government attorney, which is if you're working in a government law office for 4 years, around the time you get to 5 years, you have to make a decision. You're going to be there for your career and make a career out of it, or if not, you got to get out. Because if you get there for 6, 7, 10 years, it gets awfully hard to go back to the private sector and start developing a clientele.
Because you're institutionalized.
Yeah, and so it's not impossible, not that people couldn't do it, but I had that mindset. So at year 4, I was thinking, still had a fantastic job, had great clients to work for, great bosses, but I was thinking about what I want to do next. With my engineering, I was working on a lot of electrical law issues, and that was really fascinating, selling electricity. This county produces electricity from a incinerator.
Dickinson?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, here's a little trivia for you. So my mom grew up in Bethesda too, and when she grew up during the height of the Cold War. So she was born in the late 40s. And so during the late 50s and 60s, when they thought that the Russians were going to nuke us at any minute, my grandfather said that if the family separated and something happens, that they were to meet at the Dickinson power plant. Because everyone at the time, it was a new power plant, and it was high profile, so everyone knew where it was. So that's where it was going to be.
That was their main source. They also had a couple of landfills that they produced electricity from, burning the methane. So my in-laws at the time were thinking about, well, how do think about retirement? What do we want to do with the hardware store? And
because you were with Marlene at this point,
yes,
and so their parents owned True Value. That went back.
Yeah, the founders.
Now, were you living in Annapolis at that time?
No, actually, we were living in Baltimore. I moved from Rockville to Baltimore because my wife was getting her PhD from Johns Hopkins in public health.
She's smart.
She's a smart cookie.
She's
smart.
So I should really call her a doctor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know.
Good to know. She's so we moved to Baltimore. So I was commuting from Baltimore to Rockville, and so we wanted to start a family. That commute obviously was not very good for a young family. My in-laws were thinking about retirement, so I suggested, well, how about I work at the store for a year? If I like it, I'd stay and buy the business, and they liked that idea, and so that's what I did.
So you went from
being an associate county attorney from Montgomery County
to mixing paint.
And I had a lot of fun with it. Really enjoyed it. My in-laws are great people, and I was very fortunate because often when you're thrown into a business like that, you're buying the business on day one, and whoever grew the business is gone. And I was in a situation where I could learn from them, and they were great. And we had a good relationship. We have a good relationship. So I learned a ton after a year. I liked it, the situation. My in-laws liked the situation, and so we set on the path to figuring out how to for them to sell, for me to buy the business, and that's what I did.
Right.
And,
so this was not a handoff. It was not.
Oh no. I'm still paying it off, and I still have many more years of debt left ahead.
I knew some guys. I worked in the garden industry for years, and I knew a lot of it was a handoff like that they were given to the kids. But I knew up in Long Island, these two guys who bought it from their father, and it was a hard negotiated deal. And they bought it. I mean, they were entrepreneurs in their own right. Not to say that when you do pass something on, there's anything wrong with that. But I always admired the fact that they took on all this debt.
I would venture to say that probably the acquiring as opposed to a handoff is probably a lot cleaner and a lot better because
there's no strings.
I mean, if I just give it to you, no matter how retired I am, I still got skin in the game.
Absolutely. And, I think, and I don't blame them for feeling like they still have skin in the game. They started the business in 1974. It was a hugely risky opportunity for them. The interest rates were huge.
I heard there was a big opposition to building that.
That's my understanding. And actually, Alan Hyatt represented my in-laws for the transaction. And it was I don't know too much about the conflict, but I know it was very expensive as far as interest rates were, in the teens, not in the low single digits like they are now. So, it was a huge risk for them, but they were successful. They're very smart individuals. They grew the business, and I was very fortunate. So, yes, I had always had the stress of having to keep it profitable and keep it growing because I have this huge debt that I have to pay regardless of what the business does. But
not to mention 2 children and a wife and a house.
Exactly. So, there's always been stress. So I'm always busy. But, I've always been busy. In college and law school, I've always had been involved in organizations where I was trying to affect change. So I'm used to it and enjoy. In fact, I think I work better when I have a lot of things on my plate.
So you're now a nouveau business owner. You're learning the hardware business, and then you're like, you know what? Why don't I run for office? Well,
it's almost embarrassing how that came about, frankly. So, like I said, I always had this interest, and my kids at that point, so Zach was a couple years old, so not an infant, but certainly still pretty young and time-consuming. Isabel is 4 years older. And I read in the paper that Matt Silverman was announced his intention to retire. And I thought, that's interesting. I wonder what ward I live in, because I was like the many people who had no idea what ward I live in.
What the hell's a ward?
Yeah. So I looked it up, because I read that the replacement process would be because it was under 16 months, the Democratic Central Committee, because Matt was a Democrat, would be picking a winner and to picking a candidate based on self-applications, and it was like a 2-week process. And I thought, that's interesting. I can handle a 2-week process. And I vaguely knew Josh Cohen because our kids went to both the same preschool and the same dance place. And so I'd run into him a couple times. And so it was a Hanukkah party at one of those places. And I went up to him and I said, so what does an alderman do? And funny, in hindsight, he would laugh at this. In fact, I remember this. I asked, am I too young for this? I was about to be 40-ish or so. And he's like, no, you're not too young. And I didn't realize at the time he was younger than I am. And he was mayor. So he was encouraging, explained it. I was very interested in it. And so I put my name forward. Mr. Frenet on my left here was on about how one of my competitors was the lead candidate and was likely to be selected. And
right, that was
John Giannetti.
Yeah, who's got problems right now.
Yeah, a little bit further.
Well, it's aside from that. So, I was one of 4 candidates.
You think we're not going to gossip? What are you new to this game?
Arnold Smith, who I met at that event, and I hit it right off. I liked him a ton, and we run into each other sometimes at the store. And Tracy McGranagan, who is one of the neighbors to the Milkshake Lane property, who's had a lot of issues with that property. We're the 4 of us were the candidates. And, you were talking about being meticulous. Apparently, I didn't know how people go about this. So I had people that in the community that I thought would like me call the chair and say good things about me. And she told me later afterwards, she's like, you were the only one who ever did that. And I'm like, what? Again, kind of figuring this out as I go. And my pitch was then, as it would be now, frankly, that I think more important than my position on any particular issue that comes up is my approach. And I think of myself as an engineer, frankly, more than anything. Obviously, I practiced law for 7 years, and so I still think like a lawyer. And I've been in business at that point for 7 years, now for 13 years. And those are the mindsets that I bring. You need to run a business successfully. You realize the point that just because you're the owner, you can't be dictatorial. You have to ask your employees for help and share experiences with them. And that was the approach I took with the committee, and I was selected 5-2.
What's interesting, we talked about that before, and this is when you look at the makeup of the council. I think Ian, and I think Fred at one point, but I mean, there were most of the people who are on council or have been on council have been civil servants and government employees of some sort. Nothing, and I come from a family of civil servants and government employees, so there's nothing against that. But there's a perspective that you kind of miss when you don't have someone from the private industry, because it's a whole different perspective.
You're absolutely right. You're right in the sense that you have different perspectives. I worked as a government attorney. I had a fantastic job. I worked very hard. My colleagues worked very hard, and so certainly I'm not taking anything away from it. But running a business is different, and being an engineer is different. It's
because it's cash flow and it's debt service and
absolutely. And you have to be not necessarily the master of everything, but you have to be pretty good at a lot of things, whether it's marketing, accounting, underlying core business. Human relations is I think the biggest area where people struggle, and certainly I struggled. Still try to get better at it.
Okay, so when we come back, we'll jump right into governance.
Hi, this is Anne Arundel County Executive Steve Shue. We hear the headlines every day. Heroin, fentanyl, even elephant tranquilizer. But addiction usually starts with prescription drugs. Don't be silent about this problem. Talk to your children. Ask your doctor to provide only the minimum number of pills necessary. Go to denialisdeadly.org right now for the tools you need to stop heroin addiction before it starts.
If you don't like huge draft beer selections, don't go to Union Jack's. If you're not looking for an incredible menu and dozens of screens to catch your favorite teams, I repeat, do not go to Union Jack's. Not into darts and pool? Good. Live music not your thing? Perfect. Bottom line, if you are not interested in the best dining and bar experience in Annapolis, avoid Union Jack's. But if this all sounds totally friggin' awesome to you, visit Union Jack's in Annapolis, just across from Whole Foods in the Annapolis Town Center. Union Jack's, not your old-style pub.
And we're back with Jared Littmann. This is John Fernay and Tim Hamilton with the Maryland Crabs. And it was funny, Alderman Littmann, we were just talking about how you have to be sort of the jack of all trades in your business, and coming from an engineering, a legal background, and owning your own business, then you had to be jump into the books. And you and Alderman Arnett, arguably, are some of the most vocal critics of the way the city of Annapolis has been spending their money, how they're keeping or maybe cooking their books. And I don't suggest there's anything illegal there. I think it's just, but I think that, I mean, where do we stand? What's your opinion on this? I know there was a press conference held the day after everybody agreed to the budget, which personally I sat there and said, well, they all agreed with that last night, and now they disagree with it this
not
morning,
all. So there were a couple of no votes there.
So we're recording this on Wednesday, so you'll be listening to this on Thursday, and which meant that yesterday you had not bet in the Capitol where you addressed this. And the reason, one of the big reasons I want you to come in actually is because when it comes to local government, I think John and I, we understand local governance and civics and all the roles that people play within a government. My weak spot is when it comes to finances. So I think about this on a national scale too. When you talk about Trump comes out and goes, I inherited a disaster. And then you have the Democrats going, he inherited a gift. So you're like, where is the truth in that? Because is it in the middle, or is someone actually right? Right. So if you listen to, I went back and I listened to some of the previous interviews we did, and went with Mayor Panelides. He said, our finances are in excellent shape. And you disagreed to an extent, saying, that we are not on the brink of bankruptcy, but we have some serious sort of Damocles that's kind of hanging over someone at some point. It's like musical chairs where you have a mayor and a council that at some point is being left holding the bag. And I'm yammering on, but there's an important, I'm one of the nerds who watches city's council, and there was a really good moment a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the budget, and the alderwoman said to you, it was she said, I know we always say we're going to address it and we never do, but we will address this next year. Let's just get through this. And you said, when are we going to finally stop kicking the can down the road?
So I appreciate the intro. Let me get a couple things out on the table. One, I'm not suggesting that anything is, like you said, the cooking books. I'm not suggesting anything that the city's been doing is illegal. Nothing that I know of. I'm not suggesting that by any stretch. I'm also saying that there's improprieties. I'm just suggesting or stating that how the city budget has been managed the past number of years has been irresponsible, and I'll get to the reasons why in a second. Again, I'm not saying that there's false anything.
that was the little disclaimer on the bottom of the asterisk.
Well,
yes.
it's
especially because John brought it up because he said the cooking, the books.
But it's like your own budget, okay? I mean, I can sit there and I can live totally within my means and pay cash everywhere I go and whatnot, or I can load it up on the credit card.
Exactly, and that's the bigger issue.
And there's nothing illegal about that, but it's a different way of looking at it.
Let's walk back a little bit. And obviously, before I was in the council, I didn't know the finances as well, so I'm just going to start with generalities. During the Moore administration, there was a lot of spending money and not a lot of saving money, which was fine because every year, property values would go up. So even if property tax rates were stable, because all of our homes collectively were going up in value, the revenues each year was increasing and increasing and increasing.
City was getting a 10% raise.
Without raising taxes. And so I bring that up because the current mayor accurately says that he did not raise the tax rate. And you have to listen to him very carefully, because then it gets shorthanded to people, taxes haven't gone up. That's not the same thing. Tax rate has stayed constant, but the taxes as a whole went up by $1.4 million this year.
Because of the increase of property value.
Because of the increase of property values. And obviously I'm jumping ahead now, but that the entire amount that the increase in this year was 1.1 under the mayor's budget, and the council added $300,000. The mayor took that entire increase, $1.1 million, and plowed it entirely into new employees. which is fine as a one-year fix because it pays for itself. But those new employees will have pension and health and very long time expenses. So if property values stayed constant, those expenses continue to go up, and that's one of the problems I highlight. But let me backtrack again. So Moyer administration is spending a lot of money. We get a rec center built. We get other things being done, but no savings going on. And then the recession hits. Property values go down. And for the first time in a whole number of years, revenues went down because of it, 12% in 1 year. That was when Josh Cohen became mayor, and he is the one who inherited a mess. Because now all of a sudden we have all this debt still going up. Savings were completely brought down to near zero, and the property values just plummeted. So we couldn't even maintain a status quo budget because he has now less revenue. So the council and Cohen agreed on a huge amount of layoffs. We went from, I have the exact numbers here, but it was something like, I'll give you an exact number.
But this was during the time when Josh Cohen called Ellen Moyer a fiscal train wreck, which he was trying to distance himself politically from her as well there. And it's also during the period of time when Doug Smith was the county or the city administrator, I think was his title at that point, and he had recommended, because of the financial situation, to take a $10 million loan out to ultimately meet payroll.
Yeah, and so the beginning of Josh Cohen's term, that's right. So from FY10 to FY11, we dropped the number of employees from 594 to 537, 1 year. So very responsible steps by that city council before my time. In the succeeding years, not only did they more or less maintain the number of employees, but they put money back into the savings account. So this is during a recovery from a recession, while tax properties are still going down. They actually save money each year by $5 million a year on average during the Cohen administration, which means if you are making, I'm going to use generous numbers for salaries just to make nice even numbers. If you make $100,000 a year and you're able to save...
Leave the stand up to Tim, okay?
Yeah. So yeah, Tim makes, I'm just saying Tim makes $100,000 a year.
Easy.
And he spends $95,000 a year, and he's saving $5,000 a year. Some people might say he should save more, but he's not spending the entire $100,000, and he's not spending $150,000. So somewhat responsible. But he's still using his credit card, and he still has a mortgage on his home, and so he's got to be careful. So we
have three things. We have the cash flow, we have the savings, but then we also have debt.
Yep.
See, that's what always threw me before, is I never took the debt into consideration.
Debt is a huge issue. So because there's multiple ways you can round up, I'm going to use extremely conservative numbers because I don't want to be accused of getting the numbers wrong. So I'm going to be very conservative, but the problem could be even worse than I'm describing. Roughly in FY07, and FY stands for fiscal year. The fiscal year starts in July. That's why I can't say in 2007, because it's FY 2007 started in July of 2007, ended in June of 2008. Sorry for that complication. Anyway, we had about $70 million in debt. For the budget that we just passed, that has now ballooned up to $158 million. Our revenues have not increased nearly that much. So back in 2007, when debt was at $70 million, we were spending around $80 million.
But we were also getting that raise every year.
And
because of the increase in property taxes that was possibly able to handle that debt.
And so all debt isn't bad. Having a mortgage on your house is responsible. It makes sense. You don't have that lump sum of money. And from a government's perspective, if you're going to build a huge facility like the water treatment plant, it's a utility. The benefit's going to be accrued over 30 years. So it makes sense to have a long-term debt to pay that off. But we were using it, taking on debt for lots of things. So a simple example, Tim. If your house was in disrepair and you needed to fix the deck each year and spend $200 each year on fixing the deck, and it was every single year you spent $200 on your deck, you could do it one of two ways. You could use part of your salary to pay for that deck, or you could borrow $200. Now, if you borrow $200 to pay for that deck this year, and you have to do it again next year, that's another $200, and next year, and next year, and next year, and you're paying interest every single year. So 5 years from now, if you want to course correct and say, this is the year I'm going to start paying it out of my money, not only do you have to come up with that $200, but you're still paying for the past 5 years worth of fixing your deck for every $200. That's where the city has been. So the city has been borrowing $2 million a year to fix the streets. Fixing the streets is an admirable job. We could argue, and we should argue, frankly, we should have Alex back in here and talk about how we spend too much money on fixing the streets without focusing on transportation and bike lanes and walking paths and minimizing road repair. But once you get to the point where you say, I'm going to spend that money, spend that $200 million on road repair, the responsible thing would be to take it out of your current day's earnings.
Well, that makes sense. It's going to be recurring year after year after year after year.
And we do it for vehicles. $1 million in vehicle repair. So it's crazy how much vehicles are, but they're not buying $20,000 cars. They're buying very expensive vehicles, police cars, fire trucks. And so one vehicle could be at $500,000.
Sure.
So vehicle replacement, we all know the difference between leasing a car or paying on terms or buying it up front. You don't want your city government to be paying for cars for the next 20 years. We're paying for cars that have been 20 years old because we've been borrowing the money every year.
That's depreciation, though. So that's generally spread over the 3 years. So if you buy, it's not a capital investment.
But we're using capital money. So we're borrowing money and putting it in our capital budget for vehicle repair, $500 to $1 million every single year.
So to be clear, a capital investment would be something like
like
the water treatment
plant is a perfect example. Right. Building a new rec center. Those are perfectly appropriate.
Those are going to be one time.
Right.
They're not going to. So I guess I don't know what the exact definition is, but you could say that a capital improvement is something that's not a recurring. So it's not sidewalks. It's not roads.
A capital by definition is really talking about your assets. So are you buying a new asset or are you taking an operating cost?
Developing the park at Parkside Preserve, whatever that turns out to be.
For the developer, yes.
But I mean, purchasing it from the developer, that would be a capital?
Yeah, if you're buying land, and that's capital.
And then certainly whatever kind of development you do within the park to make it citizen-friendly with fountains and benches and stuff like that.
Yeah, but you quickly get to the line. So putting a park bench there is capital. Maintaining the park bench
is not. Right.
I was thinking that because, so you have the rec center built, but also you have to staff it, you have to maintain it, you have the upper. So whenever you have a capital investment, you're going to also increase the... Gotcha.
Absolutely. And so if you look back on accomplishments from the mayor's terms, Mayor Moyer, she spent a lot of money, but at least you got a rec center out of it. And I'm not getting into the politics right now of whether the rec center was a wise decision or not. Josh Cohen increased borrowing, but you got a water treatment plant out of it. He also initiated he completed the Market House repairs, and he initiated the dock repair. Bulkhead. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's interesting.
And some of that's grant money too, right?
Some of that's certainly grant money, absolutely. And so that's partly why, and I think the bulkhead project was focused on when it was, because the grant money was not going to be everlasting.
I mean, grant money is just income, and you've got to. I mean,
for
the most part, you can put it into your capital fund.
But you've got to match a lot.
Here's the problem with grant money. If it's $1 million that's going towards the bulkhead, that's fantastic. But we just got a grant for 12 new firefighters. Sounds great. But when that grant runs out, we have 12 new firefighters we still have to pay. Are we going to fire them because the grant runs out? Probably not. Do we have to still pay their pension? Yes. Health insurance? Yes. And so this budget that we just passed, hugely irresponsible in the sense of it took on these expenses, no new major capital project that major project like the water treatment plant that you could think of, and yet we still increased our borrowing. Now, the city council rebuffed the mayor on some of that borrowing. So that street repair we talked about, $2 million, not being borrowed this year. $1 million for sidewalks, not being borrowed this year. So it was $3 million was reduced from borrowing. So huge accomplishment from the city council, and that's why I don't think it was just theater to do that press conference.
Does $3 million, does that cut what kind of a dent does that put into the problem?
So the borrowing was somewhere in around $8 to $9 million this year. So it reduced it by $3 million. So as a percent, that's pretty high reduction.
Yeah, but as far as reduction, but where does that come from? So all of a sudden, what's our operating budget this year? It's $110 million, something like that?
So that's where we just need to continue doing better. So last year, the city council approved what's called a Pago budget. Pago is short for pay as you go. And that's what we talk about, using today's money versus borrowed money. Again, these projects, I don't so much care whether it's a capital or operating. It's the fact that, are you borrowing money or are you using money funded with today? And so we funded that Pago account with $5 million last year. The way to replenish that Pago is you put surplus into it each year. And so this year, because property values went up, because of good fiscal management, not fiscal management, but just management in general, we had a surplus. Not unusual in an up economy. And some of that surplus went into replenishing that Pago account. So from $5 million, this year went to $6.5 million. But we reduced it by $3 million to reduce the borrowing. So from $6.5 million, Pago went down to $3.5 million. And there were some other puts and takes which aren't worth going into right now. So one area of responsibility, and this is why I raised the notion of we need to do a 2% spending cut across the board. And I said I want all that $1.5 million to go into Pago. Some of that would have been for vehicle repair replacement that I mentioned. I wanted $500,000 to go towards vehicle replacement and $1 million to strictly go into that savings account.
All right, so let's go back to the example. I'm making $100,000 a year. I have to repair my deck for $200 every year. So I'm borrowing the money to do that. I'm paying interest on that. So in your example, if I'm hearing right, that I got to take that money out of my salary at this point and say, you got to fund that.
You should. You're responsible would be to do that.
So at that point, I got to do something. Maybe I cancel my cable,
right.
Or I do, we go out to dinner less or something. What is the equivalent to canceling cable or not going out to dinner for the city?
There's, I think, a lot of easy ways the city could have come up with that $2 million this year. For instance, the mayor used all of the tax increase this year, $1.1 million, to hire 10 new police officers. Well, you don't just hire 10 police officers on day one, or you don't necessarily need to. He wants to, on the one hand, rave that in the past 5 months we haven't had any new murders, which was coming off worst year in years in the number of murders we had last year. Well, if we have this reduction in crime, why did we need to hire 10 new police officers? So even if you make the conclusion you need to hire those officers, don't hire them all on day one. Mm-hmm. Spread out. Maybe you hire 5 in the first 6 months, and then you hired the other 5 in the next 6 months. Right away, the police department could have accounted for reducing their budget by 2%.
Let me ask you an overly simplistic question, and this was brought up in the debate, and I watched a lot of eyes rolled at one particular table in the forum, rather. And it was...
Would that be the same lady that was screaming and yelling?
Yes, it was. So it was where the mayor said, I am not looking to... merge the fire department with the county. If we look at... I've been one of the ones who said that I think that city government, like many city governments, tends to be a little heavy on personnel. Mm-hmm. And do we need all that personnel? You wouldn't see that in the private industry, because the private industry is really good at self-correcting when it comes to personnel. But if you take out the fire, the police, and the Department of Transportation, then maybe we're probably right where we're supposed to be. So does that beg the question, why do we need a department? And this is an honest question. I'm not saying that it should be done. Mm-hmm. I'm asking someone who kind of looked at this going that most cities our size don't have their own fire, police, or departments of transportation. Why not merge with the county?
Personally, I wouldn't object to seeing it merged.
So the question comes up a lot. If you ask the chiefs, you'll get the response that if they maintain the same level of service that you're used to now, all you've saved is one chief. Because you still need everybody else.
Same number of officers to serve the population, sure.
And so eliminating the chief, yes, you would save that salary, but that's not the kind of savings you're really looking for. So if the departments merged, city and county, what you're really talking about, the way to get savings is to have efficiencies of having less officers, basically, and less service. And so what I think the chiefs would say is the citizens of Annapolis don't want less police and fire services. Mm-hmm. I think transportation, frankly, is more interesting because I think there's more opportunity to eliminate redundancy where city and county buses are going over the same roads. I think there's more opportunity there. Going back to the issue of merging police and fire, I just don't see that happening based on what the citizens say they want.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you one thing that frustrates me with the way we currently operate is, and I know where the city is and the city isn't, but when I call 911 to report an accident or report something that I've seen, and I do that, it's very frustrating that it goes to the county.
Yeah.
And I've got to explain where I am.
But that's an efficiency. I mean,
and that would be...
the city could operate its own 911 system, but you just said a second ago, you want to merge with the county and you want to have less expenses. Having its own 911 system would be more expensive.
Right. My daughter actually...
Or merging it with the county and utilizing the one that's already in place would be...
Yeah, but then really what you're saying is to get the real redundancy, the savings, you're talking about fewer officers.
I mean, there's a rec right outside of your store, and you've got 19 different jurisdictions involved. I mean, you've got the county on the one side. I mean, Hillsmere is all... I mean, I think the Exxon is county.
The shopping center
is city.
The library is county.
Library's county, Hillsmere's county, your city.
And then continuing down towards like the CNS building.
McDonald's county, Caliente is city.
It's up and down.
Then you've got city, then Ebtide is county, CBS is city.
Yeah.
And Firehouse is county.
It's a jagged tooth because of independent annexations that weren't done comprehensively. We could talk about, that would be a nice segue to talk about planning for the city overall and the need for more planning and to do things more comprehensively.
I'll tell you what, why don't we take a break and we'll come back and we'll get right into that.
Hey, America, we need to have a little talk. We've got more food than we know what to do with in this country, yet 17 million kids in America are struggling with hunger. Makes no sense. Luckily, the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks has volunteers gathering excess food and getting it to hungry kids. They're kind of like food angels. Hey, become a food angel yourself by supporting Feeding America in your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
And we're back, and actually the conversation we had during the break was pretty lively. So we actually are going to change course a little bit because we were talking about what would happen if there was a recession, another recession, because several economists that I've been reading lately predict that we might be on the brink of another recession. All politics aside, it's just that whenever you have recovery, you have several bounces. So what would happen to us with the city budget if we hit another recession at this point and housing values fell?
Well, first, I don't think there's any doubt at some point we were going to have a recession. That's not a comment on politics. That's not a comment on national politics. It goes up and down. Our biggest issue that we should demand of our local leaders is how are you going to protect us Marylanders or Annapolitans or Anne Arundel residents during this Trump administration from the harm, whether it's Chesapeake Bay, whether it's our finances. So we're going to have a recession. And that was a point I was trying to, and I didn't finish that thought, was we're going to have a recession. So was it smart, after building up our savings of an additional $5 million a year during the Cohen administration, that in the past 4 years, it's under $1 million of surplus a year. And the mayor's budget this year was $10,000 of surplus. That's like, going back to your budget, Tim, if you made $100,000, you're going to spend $99,990. And you have $10 saved. And so what happens, Tim, if you have your car breaks down and you didn't budget for that, or you have someone passed away and you need to take a travel trip or something, you don't have the money for it. So that $10,000 that the mayor allocated for surplus was incredibly irresponsible. I alluded to the council raising the tax revenue from 1.1 to 1.4 million. The entire amount of the council's increase, that $300,000, and it's actually $323, all went towards just padding the surplus to save for a rainy day. Very responsible step by the council that I think the council should be given credit for.
That's confusing to me, is how do you differentiate between the funds that you're going to put into like a rainy day fund versus your debt reduction? You can say, it's just all about budgeting. It's just because every year in my business, I make a budget, and then reality happens, and you spend more on some things and less on some other things. But the budget is just a plan. How good of a strategic planner are you? And in this case, for a budget, we're talking about financial planning. But it's no different than what your strategic planning for an operation or for the city for the next 4 years. Another point I want to come back to, I just mentioned how during the Cohen administration, they cut the number of employees from 594 to 537 in 1 year. By the end of that administration, it had climbed just by 10 people, from 537 to 547. Now the current estimate, based on the budget we just approved, is up to 590. So the Panelides administration has hugely increased our staff. And so he talks about responsible governing. I don't think that's responsible governing, to increase our employee count by so much.
In a little bit of defense to the mayor, though, I mean, some of those staffs were pretty much forced on him by parts of the council.
So two instances that I could think of: you had an AfricanAmerican liaison and a Hispanic liaison.
Correct. Those are the two that I'm coming up with.
So let me talk to that. So the council heard from the community that this was a need, and it came up with two new positions. You know what they cost? $20,000 per year for each of those positions. So together, $40,000. Hold that though. I see you want to jump in here. At the same move, the council approved my amendments to that budget, and we cut two positions in the harbor master's office at a savings of $75,000. That in itself more than paid for that. Plus, we reduced the take-home vehicles. So employees didn't like that very much, but we reduced the total expenses by an estimated $100,000 that year to pay for that. So the council, yes, we added two positions at a total cost of $40,000. And I find it interesting that, again, I hear the mayor taking credit. I hired the African-American liaison, and I hired yes, he did hire him because the council forced him to hire those positions to be responsive to the public need. And he objected to the Hispanic liaison when I brought it up. He tried talking me out of it. And I said, no, I'm going to come up with ways to pay for it, and I think it's responsible. And now he takes credit for it. It drives me nuts when I hear him do that over and over again.
All right, so
it's a good thing the mayor got that whole forest conservation thing taken care of.
You really want to poke the bear on that one.
Well, actually, I want to talk a little bit about that. So I'm looking at the legislation that you put forth, and in the last 5 years, there's a lot of legislation that you put forward. I think, I don't know if there's anyone more prolific when it comes to pushing legislation. And there's two that jump out at me. And one was the forest conservation reforestation. And the other one, which was a little more controversial, well, maybe not controversial, but it got the non-discrimination policy through the city. And there was the argument was, is it a sanctuary city? Is it not a sanctuary city? I didn't see it that way. Politically, I'm fairly center, but, to me, I don't see local municipalities doing enforcing federal law. That's just where I am on that. But the forest conservation, that was a big one. That was a long time coming.
It took a lot of effort by a lot of people. When I joined the council, it was one of the first issues, the Annapolis Environmental Commission.
And describe what it essentially does.
The Forest Conservation Act? Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, this is something else I can really get to the weeds on, so you'll have to pull me back if need be. The state has a Forest Conservation Act, and that's as old as 1991. And the state act allows local jurisdictions to come up with their own version as long as it meets the minimum standards of the state version. So in 1992, the city, in its wisdom, rather than come up with its own act, just said, we adopt the state law. Well, that's interesting. But
what are they doing? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. And so that sounded easy and efficient, but the downside was we had our own ways of doing things in Annapolis. So we had some responsibilities in Department of Neighborhood Environmental Programs and some in Planning and Zoning. So as these issues percolated, you ended up with having both bodies, those two departments, making decisions that get appealed to different bodies. And so it was a mess. Before my time, Josh Cohen appointed a group of people. It was supposed to be evenly balanced from different perspectives to come up with the answer. And as they were working is when I joined the council in 2013. They came up with a result that still didn't make a lot of sense to most people involved. So it was a very unsatisfactory point, and the legislation that was introduced at that point just died at the end of the term because it wasn't introduced. So I started working on this issue, and I want to make it clear that I am not taking credit for having written this thing, for done this thing. I spent hundreds of hours on it in hundreds of meetings and meeting with lots of people. But people who really deserve credit are people like Diane Butler and Rob Savage that have been promoting these issues.
Rob's mad at us.
Okay. Well, probably for good reason.
No, a little bit. I gave him a sorry, not sorry.
And so with a lot of help, and really Alderman Arnett was a huge supporter and helped me with a lot of the stuff right from the beginning. And we came up with a version that was introduced, I think now in 2015. And it was very strong from an environmental perspective. It met with opposition from the development community. Actually, it first met with opposition from the Planning Commission on procedural grounds. And that's where Bob Waldman, who's a commissioner on the Planning Commission, spent a ton of time reworking the process of the Forest Conservation Act. So, by the way, I should say a little bit more what Forest Conservation Act does. What it essentially says, when you have a new development and it's on a sufficiently large property, that you're going to be allowed to take down some trees, but not all the trees. And depending on the specifics of your local jurisdiction will dictate how many of those trees can you take down. So that's essentially what FCA does. So getting back, Bob Waldman helped out a ton, and we were moving a process, and we didn't have 5 votes. We had 4. The mayor was not supportive. Other members of council were not supportive. Sheila Finlayson was not supportive. Sheila then came up with her own version of the Forest Conservation Act that was essentially met the minimum standards of the state act, but no more than that.
In all fairness, so Sheila, she tends to fall kind of on the side of development. I'm just saying that's usually where she ends up. So
well, that's where she started from. I'm going to give her credit on this.
Are municipalities required to follow the state?
They have to follow the minimum standards set in the state code.
So any municipality. So I mean, a municipality could not have. They cannot disregard the state's regulation. Okay.
And so we were in a state of we were enforcing it very haphazardly and not trying to put anyone down. It's just because we didn't adopt it very well to begin with. We then had Alderman Arnett in my version. We had Sheila's version, Alderwoman Finlayson, and Joe Budge really stepped up a ton. And if you're a supporter of the environmental progress that I've worked on, you really have to thank Alderman Arnett, Alderman Budge, and I'll give credit to Alderwoman Finlayson. And the 4 of us met for hours and hours, oftentimes with help from city offices, city attorney. We had like 3 different city attorneys throughout this process because it took so long, and the city attorney were on a merry-go-round, so that was delays. Again,
it's a very transient job.
Maria Broadbent from the city was very helpful. And so the 4 of us council members met with the various staff hours and hours. It took, I think, 7 months. Then we had to get approval from this document from DNR, because again, DNR runs the Forest Conservation Act and had to kind of sign off on our act meeting the minimum requirements and so on. And DNR pushed back on a couple issues, including the concept of no net loss, which I'm going to put aside for a minute. And so finally, the four of us got to agreement, and that's where I give the other three members a lot of credit. Like I said, Alderman Arnett was huge. He was always pushing for transparency and involving the public at each stage whenever these processes would get played out. Joe Budge was fantastic in getting us through every single minute detail. This was a 58-page document. And so when finally the four of us brought it to the full council, I don't think our colleagues probably understood it in depth. They understood some of the bigger points. And then the mayor at that point says, sign me up too, I'm a sponsor too. And so now it looks like there's 5 sponsors. And he says, look, I got past the Forest Conservation Act, which, again, I just think is kind of silly that, yes, it happened during his administration. So that I don't begrudge him that. But to say that he should be re-elected because of his hard work on the Forest Conservation Act, that's what makes my blood boil.
So I got to be honest with you. I followed this during the entire time that it was going through the process, and I had my doubts whether it was going to pass. And it really gained momentum quickly. So that I remember talking to John, and he's like, "I think this is going to go." I'm like, "No." He goes, "I think it is."
It's been a good year. So that passed in July, and then in September we passed the Annapolis. I'm sorry, that
passed at like 2 a.m. or something like that. It was ridiculous.
I'm forgetting that.
I remember.
Actually,
you were bleary-eyed at that point.
Probably. I'm very glad it was done, though. I appreciate my colleagues supporting it and the cooperation from so many people. In September, we passed the adequate public facilities. No, actually, that was passed in July. I'm mixing up my time frame. I think the forest conservation was back in September. So adequate public facilities took a year to pass. That was introduced. I had support from Alderman Pfeiffer and Alderman Arnett. Terrific supporters on this issue. And what APF does is look at the development process, and what we already have in the code is say when a development comes in, we're going to look at our city services. Do we have enough firefighters, police officers, sewer service, water service to support that facility? Well, it left out schools. And it's complicated because the county is the one who runs the schools, whereas the city runs those other services. But it was irresponsible to ignore the school capacity issue because the county doesn't have any say on our developments. And so what was happening is the city would approve these developments, and literally, when you talk to the county, the school board at the time, they would say, essentially in August, they would get all these new students registering, because there was no communication between those two entities.
Well, yeah, Hillsmere has 5 trailers now out there, and
right. So before this latest effort, and during Josh Cohen's term, Alderman Arnett and Pfeiffer and I were successful in passing a sort of APF light, in which at least forced that coordination. Well, in the new term, we looked how we went about it. We worked for a very long time again, and the mayor was opposed to it. And I scheduled a meeting, say, could we talk about APF? And we met and asked, okay, what don't you like about it? And he was completely unhelpful. He said, well, I haven't really read it yet. I can't tell you what I want changed in it. I just don't like it.
This was who?
The mayor. And me trying to find out what amendments would it take to come to the table.
Right.
Had no response. Essentially, all I got was, well, I want to do this task force with the county. And it sounded to me as if he just needed to check the box to do something that Steve Hsu asked him to do. And so we ended up getting another 7-month delay just so we could have this task force that ended up with a report that no one's probably read or understood, or certainly not implemented is the main point. But we came back to the table. At that point, this is now in July, and we finally made some progress, and we were heading towards a vote. And the mayor still wouldn't allow us to use 100% capacities. And what I mean by that is the county would say if the school is at full capacity, no development. And the mayor insisted that he didn't want the high school to be closed because it was having some capacity issues. So to get the mayor's vote, we had to up the capacity level to 120%, meaning there'd be too many students for 100%. The county would close the school, but we were going to allow more students and still allow more development while that school was continued to be over capacity. So with that concession and increasing the elementary middle school to 105%, the mayor signed on. And now he takes credit for passing the APF despite weakening its standards versus what it really should have been.
So what are you going to do with all this free time now that you're coming to the home stretch?
Well, I do think about it a lot, to be honest.
You're going to miss it.
I will miss it. Obviously, I'm invested on these issues. I feel passionately about these issues, and I care about these issues. I really enjoy the opportunity that I've had to represent Ward 5, represent the city, and work on issues that I think people care about. So I've enjoyed it.
So you're going to take a year off and then come back?
I'm going to figure out in December. So, after the elections in November, since this job started, I took on a couple other jobs as well. I'm on the board of directors for the True Value.
I saw you at 7-Eleven the other day.
I have no idea what that means, to be honest.
He just gets to the point where he laughs whenever we say something. At the end, he goes, "What the hell do they mean by that?"
So I'm on the board. I go to Chicago frequently to those responsibilities. That's a huge honor, and I'm very fortunate, and I enjoy that experience. I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about strategic planning. It's really highlighted for me how much strategic planning we don't do in this city and how much needs to be done. In December, when I'm off the city council, I'll just reevaluate. I'd like to stay involved in some way. I don't know what that's going to be, but I'm definitely looking to still stay involved, but just have a little bit more time to do a better job at all the other things I do.
We're running out of time here, but would you be willing to come back and talk about, because I think this would be fascinating, about what it takes to be an elected official in Annapolis?
Sure.
Because
Getting the votes, the deal making.
I'll be candid here. I think you're probably one of the worst campaigners, probably because you've not really had much people to challenge. I think you're arguably the most effective alderman that is on there, that sits on the council.
There's a lot of helpful people. We all
I understand that, and it is a collaborative team effort to do it. But I think that that'd be fascinating to learn what it really takes to do it and to do it effectively. I can sit there and show up at the meetings, a couple times a month and cash that big $14,000 check, which is a travesty. But that's
it's not even $14,000. It's close, but I'd be happy to talk about it more in depth. But I do want to say this: that I think that the way we work on the council, we're not looking about party affiliations when we vote and when we discuss these issues. I've had as strong disagreements with Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderman Joe Budge as I've had the mayor. I found myself in agreement with Alderman Payon on a number of financial issues. And so I think the extent that, that council's, two Republicans and the 7 Democrats, it's such a big issue, is something that's played out in the media. And I've heard on your podcast come up. I've heard, I was almost surprised that the mayor would even say, I've heard him say on your podcast or the forum, I think it was, one or the other, that it's been so hard to get appointments run past the city council. We're so difficult. I can't think of a single appointment except for Tim Murnane that the council has turned him down on, or a single legislative initiative that we've turned him down on. The city council has not been obstructionist by any stretch. He just hasn't had those initiatives. All the initiatives have been from city council members, or the couple that he's had, like the solar farm, was council approved. And the Tim Murnane, the only reason I think, or probably lots of reasons why Tim Murnane was not approved, but principal for me at least, was that he was double dipping. He was working for the Panelides family in a private capacity,
right,
and was being offered as his city attorney, and that's just not appropriate.
And there have been a couple of delays. There was a delay on the confirmation of Chief Baker, and that was because he had to meet with the committee.
Baker and started with Sandra Chapman on HACA, and we told him at the time it's not a problem with the individuals, but there's a process. The city council has to vet.
The box needs to be checked.
Yeah, and it's, if you ask anyone who's been vetted by me, I don't just say, a couple gratuitous questions. I ask them a lot of really hard questions. I want to know who they are, because I want to feel comfortable that if I'm approving somebody, that I got a chance to know them. And I haven't turned down any of the mayor's nominations except for the one I mentioned.
Right. You were bitch. You said you had some bitches about some of the stuff that we've said in the past. Bring it on.
Well, I think,
and then we'll wrap it up on an up note here.
I'll start with you, John, because
and I feel we'll run out of time after that.
Yeah, this might take a while. So you, I think, are overly harsh to the environmental community for trying to get involved in these developments. And I will first point out that I think that why you're overly harsh is because you try to group them all together. And environmentalists, just like Democrats and just like Republicans, there's a broad spectrum. And certainly there's a couple of them that might say no to every single development, and no matter what was brought up. And I'm not talking about trying to defend those people, but I'm talking about a lot of reasonable people that are just saying, you have a comprehensive plan from 2009 that called for doing X, Y, and Z before you approve any developments, and you haven't done X, Y, and Z yet. So what are you doing approving these developments? Right. I'm saying that if you're going to approve developments that's going to add traffic, get a really good handle on what that traffic is. And I heard the forum mayor talking about some additional traffic studies, but we haven't done those yet, and yet we still approve all these developments.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
And that's why Rob Savage is mad at us too.
Well, I will also say that I tend to, most of my opinion is stemming from the Crystal Spring debate. there is a very loud vocal. It was like, no, you're not going to take one single tree down, and they've been very loud and vocal, and that is that group. But I mean, no, that's fair. I mean, I'm totally all for responsible development. I'm also for property owners' rights.
Absolutely, I am too.
And I think that there's a happy medium. I think the Parkside Preserve thing is a phenomenal solution there.
It is. That was, I think, Mr. Tom Andrews' idea, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. I think that was a great solution. It's a shame that it had gotten to that point, because the city could have, in its authority, gotten to that point without spending $1.5 million and scaling back that development by that same amount, just by finding that balance at a better point. But city used $1.5 million to get to the same point.
Okay, I promise to hug more trees.
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
I addressed the other point without calling Tim out on it, but
we're out of time, so we're good.
Well, thanks for listening.
Tim, I think you had, when you were interviewing the mayor, you were feeding into the thwarted by the council, was the exact phrase I had written down. And again, I'm like, what is he talking about?
I seem like angrily scribbling that down. Well, I say a lot of things that I don't pay attention to, in my defense. That one... Well, there's a couple things. There was, I think back at like 2010 with what you were saying is that I said that the mayor had been thwarted by the council on occasion. I didn't mean as dramatically as that. What I meant, like in 2010 or 11, it was Josh. I remember watching the city council, and I think the city council was under a lot of pressures before you were on to open up the market house temporarily, and he didn't want to do it. And I was involved in that in a different life, and we got involved in that, and he was overruled by the council. I think it was unanimous. They opened it temporarily, and it was not good for the vendors, and I know that firsthand.
And that makes sense, but that's during Josh Cohen's time, not an example of when...
The other one I would say would be, I know the first budget, I think that the mayor put forth called for a few layoffs that he wanted to, and I remember...
He has said that
was the 2014 one.
Yeah, but he has described it the way you just described it. My recollection is that it was actually a number of furloughs, and it involved not filling some positions, and it did include firing someone in the planning department, Tom Smith,
right,
and someone in the environmental programs department, Frank Biba.
Well, so my point with that, and regardless, it's the way it was positioned, is that one of the councilors said at that point, saying, we will not approve any budget that includes a single layoff, and that frustrated me because you can't run a business that way. So I mean, whether or not it was going to actually do it.
I have felt the same way.
Not that I don't want to see anyone out of work. I really don't. And I've said this before. I've had to lay off people, and it's horrible. But at the same time, there's sometimes, in order to save the collective, you have to let some people go. So by thwarted, I didn't see like city council with like their black hats and twirling their mustaches. But
I appreciate the explanation. I think in that instance, his budget was still approved. And frankly, my recollection is that I had a number of amendments that brought back those couple positions that would have been fired with offsetting cuts elsewhere in the budget.
So I think in the future, we're going to do a couple of Facebook Live ones, so you can fact check us live, because you said that's your dream. But
well, most of the time I'm listening to it in snippets here and there, so it's kind of convenient, to do it. But yeah, when I hear John going, "Oh, those environmentalists,"
John's the worst. We all both know that.
Killed that project, and I'm thinking, no, the environmentalists did not.
So I own stock in Caterpillar.
So all right. Well, in the meantime, Jared, you can find us on Facebook. So we're on Facebook. We have a group. We have a page. So find us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a comment, leave a rating. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Tim Hamilton47. John's at Annapolis. We're at the MD Crabs Podcast. Find us at info@the-Maryland-Crabs if you want to send us an email. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. This was fun.
You can find Jared at KB True Value.
Yeah.
Throw a plug there. I'll tell you, pretty much if you need anything, they got to go look and check all this stuff out. It's amazing.
I was there 4 times yesterday, literally. I was working on my boat, and the last time I was muttering under my breath.
I was teasing with my daughter, saying, "Hey, it's 5 minutes to 5. Why don't we go in and browse?"
Well, you know what?
You closed at 5, and I was
that staff is what has enabled me. That staff and my wife, frankly, has enabled me to put the time into the city council, because I really have been away from the business. If I'm working on city council stuff, it's taking time away from my business, taking away time from my family. And the staff at K&B True Value have been awesome, stepping up and managing the business. I'm still there most days of the week, but not certainly on the face of the business on the sales floor like I used to be. And that staff has been great. And my wife, I can't appreciate enough.
And that'll tie into entitle time to our next time you come visit us, and we talk about what it takes to be an alderman.
Yeah, when there's no filter at that point, when he gets good, you know what? Screw it. Here's what happened. All right, Jared, thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks, guys. Take care.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home.